On a cold night, when the wind carried the scent of rain through the quiet streets of a small African town, a young African woman stood alone outside the gates of the richest house anyone had ever seen in that place. She was pregnant, but that was not the strange part. The strange part was that she herself did not know who the father was. And soon, the entire town would learn that this mystery was tied to a man whose name carried power, money, and secrets that had been buried for many years. His name was Marcus Bennett, and the moment he looked into the frightened eyes of that young woman standing outside his mansion, his life began to unravel in ways he could never have imagined. The night was unusually quiet. The town of Ndilovu was used to silence after sunset, but this silence felt different. Heavy, waiting. The kind of silence that presses against your chest and makes your heart beat a little faster. Grace held her thin shawl tightly around her shoulders as the wind brushed against her skin. Her belly, round and heavy with life, stretched the fabric of her simple dress. She looked tired. Not the kind of tired that comes after a long day of work. This was the tiredness of someone who had been carrying fear for many nights without sleep. Behind the tall iron gates stood the Bennett mansion. Its lights glowed warmly against the darkness. The tall windows shone like golden eyes watching the night. Inside those walls were marble floors, expensive paintings, and a life so far from Grace's world that it might as well have been another country. Grace swallowed slowly. Her hands trembled as she reached for the bell. For a moment she hesitated, because once she rang that bell, everything would change. She closed her eyes. Then she pressed it. The soft chime echoed through the gate. A minute passed. Then another. Finally, the gate opened just enough for an elderly security guard to step forward. His uniform was crisp, his posture straight, and his eyes narrowed with suspicion. He looked at Grace, then at her stomach. His voice was rough. "What do you want?" Grace shifted nervously. I need to see Mr. Bennett." The guard frowned. "People don't just come here asking to see Mr. Marcus Bennett in the middle of the night." Grace nodded slowly. "I know." Her voice was quiet, almost lost in the wind. "But he needs to see me." The guard sighed heavily. "You should go home." "Girl, this isn't the place for—" "I'm carrying something that belongs to him." The words came out before she could stop them. The guard froze. His eyes moved again to her stomach. "What did you say?" Grace's lips trembled. "I didn't come here to cause trouble," she whispered. "But the truth has brought me here." Inside the mansion, Marcus Bennett was standing beside a wide window that overlooked the long driveway. Marcus was a man who had built his fortune through intelligence, discipline, and a reputation that frightened competitors. At 48 years old, he owned half the businesses in Ndilovu. Tall, sharp eyes, impeccably dressed, even inside his own home. But tonight, something heavy sat on his heart. The glass of expensive whiskey in his hand remained untouched. Marcus had always believed that control was the most valuable thing a man could have. Control of money, control of reputation, control of life itself. But the truth is, friends, life often laughs at the illusion of control. Behind him, his housekeeper Maria walked quietly into the room. "Sir," she said gently, "there's someone at the gate asking to see you." Marcus did not turn around. "Tell them to come back tomorrow." Maria hesitated. "It's a young woman." Marcus Sageda. "A lot of people want something from me." Maria. "I know, sir." Maria paused. Then she spoke the words that would change everything. "She says she's carrying something that belongs to you." Marcus slowly turned. His eyes narrowed. "What?" Maria swallowed. "She's pregnant, sir." The room seemed to grow colder. Marcus placed the whiskey glass down carefully. "I don't know what kind of foolish game someone is playing tonight," he said calmly. "But send her away." Maria didn't move. "Sir, she says she doesn't know who the father is." Marcus frowned. "Then how exactly does this concern me?" Maria looked uncomfortable. Because she said the last thing she remembers is waking up after attending the charity gala you hosted 3 months ago. Now Marcus's expression changed. The charity gala, a massive event. Hundreds of guests. Music, drinks, speeches. It had been the most important public event of the year. Marcus felt a strange tightness in his chest. And she's outside? Yes, sir. Marcus walked slowly toward the window. From the distance, he could see her standing near the gate. A small figure in a simple dress, one hand resting protectively over her belly. Rain had begun to fall lightly. For a moment, Marcus said nothing. Then he spoke quietly. "Bring her inside." Maria nodded and hurried out. Outside, the guard opened the gate. Grace stepped forward cautiously. The rain touched her face as she walked along the long stone driveway toward the mansion. Each step felt heavier than the last. Inside the large entrance hall, the doors opened. Warm light spilled across the polished marble floor. Grace hesitated at the doorway. The house felt enormous, and she felt very small. Then she saw him. Marcus Bennett stood at the far end of the hall, tall, still, watching her. His eyes moved slowly from her face to the curve of her belly. Grace felt her throat tighten. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but reality was harder. Marcus finally spoke. His voice was calm, controlled. "Explain why you're standing in my house, making accusations that could destroy a man's reputation." Grace lowered her eyes. "I'm not here to accuse you." "Then why are you here?" Her hand rested gently on her stomach. "Because something terrible happened to me that night." Marcus's jaw tightened. "And you think I'm responsible?" Grace shook her head quickly. "No." Marcus frowned. "Then what exactly are you saying?" Grace lifted her gaze slowly. Her eyes were filled with fear, and something else. "Confusion? I'm saying," she whispered, "that I woke up the next morning in a room I had never seen before." Marcus said nothing. The rain outside began to fall harder. Grace continued. "My head hurt. I couldn't remember the night clearly. Only flashes." "What flashes?" Grace hesitated. Then she said the words that made Marcus's heart skip once. "I remember your voice." Silence filled the room. Marcus stared at her. Then he spoke slowly. "That proves nothing." "I know." Grace reached into her small bag. Her hands trembled. She pulled out a folded envelope. Inside it was a medical report. She handed it to him. Marcus opened it. His eyes moved across the paper. Then he stopped breathing for a moment, because the date of conception written on that report matched exactly the night of his charity gala. Grace whispered softly, "I don't know who the father is." Her voice broke slightly. "But whoever he is, he was there that night." Marcus looked at the paper again. Then at her. Then at the rain falling against the windows. And for the first time in many years, Marcus Bennett felt something he could not control. Fear, because if the truth about that night began to surface, it would not just change Grace's life, it would expose secrets that powerful people had spent years trying to bury. And the question that now hung in the air was simple. If Marcus Bennett was not the father, then who was? And why did Grace remember his voice in the darkness of that room? Friends, this was only the beginning, because the deeper Marcus would dig into the truth of that night, the more dangerous the answers would become. Before we continue, please like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story, because what Marcus Bennett was about to discover would shake the entire town of India. The rain continued to fall against the tall windows of the Bennett mansion. Inside the quiet hall, the sound of water tapping against the glass echoed like a distant clock counting down to something unavoidable. Marcus Bennett stood still, the medical report still in his hand, while Grace waited silently across from him. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Marcus slowly folded the paper and placed it on the table beside him. His sharp eyes studied Grace carefully, as if searching her face for a hidden lie. But what he saw there was not deception. Only fear, exhaustion, and a quiet determination. "Sit down," Marcus finally said, pointing toward a chair near the fireplace. Grace hesitated for a moment, then slowly lowered herself into the seat. The warmth of the fire touched her cold hands, and for the first time that night, she allowed herself to breathe a little easier. Marcus remained standing, tall, controlled, watching her closely. "Start from the beginning," he said. Tell me everything you remember. Grace nodded slowly, her fingers resting gently over her stomach. 3 months ago, she began softly, I was working at the charity gala your company hosted. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Working? Yes, Grace replied. I was hired for the night as a server. I needed the money. Marcus leaned against the table, listening carefully now. He remembered that event well. Hundreds of important guests had attended, politicians, investors, journalists, and some of the wealthiest people in the region. It had been a night of celebration, but now, hearing Grace speak, it no longer felt like a celebration at all. I was serving drinks most of the evening, Grace continued. People were laughing, music was playing, and everything seemed normal. She paused, trying to remember. Then someone offered me a glass of wine. I usually don't drink, but they insisted. They said it was part of the celebration. Marcus's eyes narrowed slightly. And after that, Grace swallowed. That's when things started to feel strange. The room grew quieter as she spoke. Even the rain seemed softer, as if listening. My head began to spin, Grace said. The music sounded louder. The lights looked blurry. She closed her eyes briefly, trying to pull the memory from the fog in her mind. I remember walking down a hallway. Someone was guiding me. I couldn't see clearly. Marcus felt a tight knot forming in his chest. Did you see who it was? He asked carefully. Grace shook her head. No. Everything was hazy. Marcus turned slightly toward the window, his thoughts racing. Something about this story did not sit right with him. Grace continued quietly. I remember entering a room. I think it was upstairs. Then I remember a voice speaking. Marcus turned back toward her immediately. A voice? Grace nodded. Yes. What did it say? Grace hesitated, trying to be certain of a memory. It said, You're safe here. Just rest. Marcus felt a strange chill move through him. Are you sure that was my voice? He asked slowly. Grace looked down at her hands. I'm not sure, she admitted. It sounded familiar, but everything after that went dark. Silence settled in the room again. Marcus walked slowly toward the fireplace and stared into the flames. His mind began moving quickly through the details of that night. The gala had ended around midnight. Security had been tight. Guests had moved freely through the house. But no one had reported anything unusual, at least not to him. Grace, Marcus said finally, why did you come to me instead of the police? Grace's expression softened slightly. Because I don't believe you hurt me. Marcus looked surprised. You don't? She shook her head gently. No. Then why involve me at all? Grace lifted her eyes toward him again. Because the last clear thing I remember, before everything went dark, was hearing someone say, Your name. Marcus felt the word strike him harder than he expected. My name. Yes, Grace said quietly. Someone in the hallway said, Mr. Bennett is waiting upstairs. Marcus's jaw tightened. That single sentence changed everything. Because if someone had used his name to lead Grace into that room, then someone had used his reputation to hide something much darker. And suddenly, Marcus realized something troubling. He had never personally met most of the temporary staff hired for that event, which meant someone could have easily moved through the house without drawing attention. Marcus returned to the table and picked up the medical report again. 3 months, exactly the same date as the gala, too exact to be coincidence. He looked at Grace again. Who hired you to work that night? Grace thought for a moment. A woman from an event company, she said. She handed me a badge when I arrived. Do you remember her name? Grace shook her head slowly. No, but I still have the badge. Marcus straightened immediately. You kept it. Grace reached into her bag again and carefully pulled out a small plastic card. It was slightly worn from being carried around for weeks. She handed it to him. Marcus examined it closely. The logo belonged to the event management company his organization had hired for the gala, but something else caught his attention. There was a handwritten number on the back of the badge. Marcus frowned. Did you write this? Grace leaned forward to look. No. That was already there when I received it. Marcus turned the card over again. The number was short. Just 3 digits. But something about it stirred a memory deep in his mind. He walked toward a nearby cabinet and opened a drawer. Inside were several security maps of the mansion from the night of the event. Marcus spread one of the maps across the table. Then he looked again at the number. Room 312. Marcus's eyes widened slightly, because room 312 was not a guest room. It was a private office suite, and only a few trusted people had access to it. Grace watched his reaction carefully. "What does it mean?" she asked quietly. Marcus did not answer immediately. Instead, he stared down at the map as an unsettling thought began forming, because the keycard logs for that office would still exist in the mansion's security system. Which meant someone could find out exactly who had entered that room that night. Marcus looked at Grace again. For the first time, his voice carried a new tone. Determination. "If someone hurt you that night," sighed he slowly, "then they did it under my roof." Grace said nothing. "And if that's true, I will find them." Grace felt a small flicker of hope inside her chest. But Marcus already understood something she did not. If the keycard logs revealed what he feared, then the person responsible would not be a stranger. It would be someone powerful. Someone close. And when that truth came out, the scandal would not just ruin one life. It could destroy an entire empire. Marcus folded the map slowly. Then he looked toward the staircase leading upstairs, because the answers they needed were sitting quietly inside the mansion's security system, waiting. But as Marcus prepared to retrieve those records, a new and disturbing question entered his mind. What if the logs had already been erased? Because if someone had planned this carefully, they might have planned that too. And if that was true, then the mystery surrounding Grace's pregnancy was about to become far more dangerous than either of them imagined. Marcus Bennett did not sleep that night. The mansion had grown quiet after Maria guided Grace to a small guest room near the back garden. The rain had stopped, but the cold air still clung to the windows like a warning. Marcus remained in his office, staring at the security console that controlled every camera and every door inside the house. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper. A single desk lamp cast a warm circle of light across the table, where the mansion's security laptop sat open. Marcus leaned forward slowly, his fingers resting on the keyboard. For years, he had trusted this system to protect his home and his reputation. Now he was about to discover whether it had also hidden a crime. He typed in his access code carefully. The screen flickered, and a list of archived security records appeared. Each entry showed the doors that had been opened during the charity gala 3 months earlier. Marcus's eyes moved quickly down the list. Hundreds of entries. Guests moving through hallways, staff entering service rooms, security patrols checking exits. Then he found it. Room 312. Marcus leaned closer to the screen. Only 4 people had used keycards to open that door on the night of the gala. The first was Marcus himself, earlier in the evening while preparing his speech. The second was his assistant, who had placed documents inside the office. The third entry made Marcus frown. It belonged to someone who should never have been there. The name on the screen read Harrison Cole. Marcus's jaw tightened slowly. Harrison Cole was not an employee. He was not security staff. He was not even part of the event management company. Harrison Cole was Marcus Bennett's business partner. For 15 years, Harrison had helped manage several of Marcus's largest investments. Calm, intelligent, and respected. He was known across the town as a man who handled money with ruthless efficiency. Marcus sat back in his chair. The idea that Harrison might be connected to Grace's story felt impossible, but the record on the screen did not lie. Harrison's keycard had opened room 312 at 11:47 p.m. that night. Marcus leaned forward again. Just 3 minutes later, another entry appeared. The door had opened again at 11:50 p.m. But this time, the record did not show a name. Instead, it showed the words, "Temporary Staff Access." Marcus's eyes narrowed. Temporary staff cards were not supposed to work in the private office wing. Someone had changed the permissions, and only 2 people in the company had the authority to do that: Marcus Bennett or Harrison Cole. Marcus exhaled slowly as the weight of the discovery settled over him. If Harrison had changed the system permissions, then he had done it deliberately, which meant he expected someone with a temporary badge to enter that room. Someone like Grace. A slow chill moved down Marcus's spine. The mansion was silent around him. Too silent. At that same moment, in the guest room down the hallway, Grace sat awake on the edge of the bed. Sleep would not come to her tonight. The room smelled faintly of lavender soap and fresh linen. It was more comfortable than any place she had stayed in years, but her mind refused to rest. She stared at the small lamp beside the bed. Fragments of memory continued to float through her thoughts. Music, bright lights, voices, and one strange detail she had almost forgotten. Grace suddenly sat up straighter. She remembered a smell. A strong smell. Not wine, not perfume. Something sharp and chemical. Her heart began beating faster, because she had smelled that same scent earlier that night when Marcus passed by her in the hallway. Grace stood up slowly. Her hand rested over her stomach as she tried to calm herself. The scent had come from somewhere else. Not Marcus, but someone standing near him. Someone wearing a strong cologne mixed with something else. Something medicinal. Grace's breathing quickened. A face appeared faintly in her memory. Tall, dark suit, cold eyes. She whispered the words to herself. "I've seen him before." Back in his office, Marcus printed the security record from the computer. The paper slid out of the machine with a soft mechanical hum. He studied the times again carefully. 11:47 p.m. Harrison entering room 312. 11:50 p.m. Temporary staff badge entering Grace. Marcus suddenly remembered something else. At exactly 11:45 p.m. that night, Harrison had disappeared from the ballroom for nearly half an hour. Marcus had assumed his partner was taking an important phone call. Now the timeline looked very different. Marcus stood up from his desk. His mind had already begun forming a plan. But before confronting Harrison, Marcus needed one more piece of evidence. He opened another folder inside the security system. Camera recordings. The gala had been recorded from more than 20 different angles inside the mansion. Marcus selected the hallway outside room 312. The video file loaded slowly. Grainy footage appeared on the screen. Guests walking through the hallway. Staff carrying trays of drinks. Marcus fast-forwarded to 11:45 p.m. Then he saw him. Harrison Cole walked calmly down the hallway. His posture was relaxed, his suit perfectly pressed. In his hand he held a glass of whiskey. He stopped outside room 312. Then he opened the door and stepped inside. Marcus continued watching. 3 minutes passed. Then a second figure appeared at the far end of the hallway, a young woman wearing a server uniform. Grace's movements were slow and unsteady. Someone walked beside her, but the person's face remained hidden by the angle of the camera. Marcus leaned closer to the screen. The two figures stopped outside room 312. The hidden person swiped the door open. Then Grace was gently guided inside. The door closed. Marcus stared at the screen, his heart beating harder, but the next moment made his blood run cold, because just before the camera angle lost sight of the second figure, the man stepped slightly into the light, and Marcus saw his face clearly. It was Harrison Cole. Marcus sat frozen in his chair. The evidence was no longer a suspicion. It was a fact. Harrison Cole had brought Grace into that room, which meant Harrison knew exactly what had happened that night. And if Marcus understood his business partner correctly, Harrison would never have allowed such evidence to exist unless he believed no one would ever look for it. Marcus slowly closed the laptop. His hands were steady now. His voice was quiet as he spoke to the empty room. "Harrison, what have you done?" Because Marcus already knew something terrible. Harrison Cole was not just capable of betrayal, he was capable of something far worse. And tomorrow morning, Marcus Bennett would look his partner in the eyes and demand the truth. But there was one question that still haunted him. If Harrison had brought Grace into that room, then who had left her there? And what had happened during the hours the cameras could not see? The first light of morning crept slowly across the tall windows of the Bennett mansion. A pale golden glow touched the marble floors and the quiet hallways that had held so many secrets through the night. Marcus Bennett stood alone in his office, staring out at the garden as the sun rose above the trees. His mind had not rested even for a moment. The evidence from the security camera still played in his thoughts like a repeating echo. Harrison Cole leading Grace down that hallway. Harrison opening the door to room 312. Harrison disappearing inside with her while the music of the gala continued downstairs. Marcus clenched his jaw. For 15 years, Harrison had been more than a business partner. He had been someone Marcus trusted with millions of dollars, sensitive company decisions, and private meetings with investors. Now that same man stood at the center of something dark and unforgivable. Marcus turned away from the window. Today, he would face Harrison, but he needed to understand one more thing before that conversation happened. Why? Why would a man like Harrison risk everything for something so cruel? The soft knock on the office door broke his thoughts. "Come in," Marcus said. Maria stepped inside quietly. The scent of fresh coffee drifted gently through the room as she carried a tray toward the desk. "Good morning, sir," she said gently. Marcus nodded, though his eyes still looked distant. "Did Grace sleep?" he asked. Maria sighed softly. "Not much." Marcus frowned. "She's awake now," Maria continued. "She asked if she could speak with you." Marcus paused for a moment before answering. "Send her in." A few minutes later, Grace entered the office slowly. The morning light revealed the exhaustion on her face more clearly now. But there was something else there, too. A growing sense of determination. She sat carefully in the chair across from Marcus's desk. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Marcus slid the printed security record across the table toward her. Grace looked down at the paper. "What is it?" she asked. Marcus folded his hands together. "It's proof that you were taken into room 312 that night." Grace's eyes widened slightly. "You found something?" Marcus nodded slowly. "The cameras recorded who brought you there." Grace's breath caught in her chest. "Who?" Marcus hesitated. Then he answered quietly, "Harrison Cole." Grace stared at him. The name clearly meant nothing to her. Marcus leaned back slightly in his chair. "He's my business partner." Grace looked confused. "But why would he?" Her voice faded as the question hung in the air. Marcus shook his head slowly. "That's what I'm going to find out." Grace looked down at her hands. Her fingers tightened around the edge of her dress. "There's something else I remembered last night," she said softly. Marcus looked up immediately. "What is it?" Grace took a slow breath. "The smell?" Marcus frowned. "What smell?" "The man who walked beside me in the hallway. He smelled strange." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "Strange how?" Grace searched for the right words. "Like strong cologne," she said slowly. "But also something sharp. Like chemicals." Marcus felt another uneasy feeling settle in his chest, because Harrison Cole was known for wearing an extremely strong cologne, a scent that filled every room he entered. But the chemical smell Grace described suggested something worse, something medical, something that could explain why her memory had faded that night. Marcus's voice became colder. "You think someone drugged your drink?" Grace looked down again. "I think so." The word hung heavily between them. Marcus stood up slowly. If Harrison had drugged Grace deliberately, then this was not just an accident. It was a planned crime, and the man responsible had been walking freely through Marcus's company for months afterward. Marcus picked up his phone. Grace watched nervously. "Who are you calling?" she asked. Marcus's expression hardened. "Harrison." The phone rang twice before the familiar voice answered. "Marcus?" Harrison said smoothly. "Earl call." Marcus kept his voice calm. "I need to see you. Immediately." There was a short pause on the line. "Something wrong?" Marcus looked directly at Grace as he answered, "Yes." Another pause followed. Then Harrison chuckled softly. "You sound serious. I'll come by the office in an hour." Marcus ended the call without another word. Grace shifted uneasily in her chair. "He's coming here." Marcus nodded. "Yes." She looked frightened now. "What if he denies everything?" Marcus's eyes darkened slightly. "He will." Grace swallowed. And if he lies... Marcus walked slowly back toward the desk. Then he placed the security photos from the hallway camera directly in front of her. Harrison's face was clearly visible beside Grace's unsteady figure. "He can lie about many things," Marcus said quietly, "but he can't lie about this." Grace stared at the image. Her breathing became shallow. I remember him," she whispered. Marcus froze. "You remember, Harrison?" Grace nodded slowly. Her voice trembled slightly as the memory returned. "He was standing near the bar earlier that night." Marcus leaned forward. "What was he doing?" Grace's eyes widened. "He was watching the staff." Marcus felt a cold realization move through his mind. Watching? Not the guests. The staff, which meant Harrison had been looking for someone. Someone vulnerable. Someone easy to isolate. Grace's voice grew weaker. "He offered me that drink." Marcus felt the room go silent, because that single sentence changed everything. If Harrison had personally handed Grace the wine that night, then the entire event had been part of his plan. Marcus looked down at the photo again. His voice was barely more than a whisper. "You trusted him." Grace nodded faintly. "I thought he was just being kind." Marcus straightened slowly. Kindness. That was the mask men like Harrison wore best. But now Marcus knew the truth. And Berison Harrison Cole would walk into this mansion expecting a normal business conversation. Instead, he would be walking directly into the moment that could destroy his life. But even Marcus did not yet realize how deep Harrison's crime truly went. Because the secret behind that night, in room 312, was still darker than either of them imagined. And when the full truth came out, it would reveal something far more disturbing than a single crime. It would reveal a betrayal that had been building for years. The morning sun climbed higher over the town of Indalavu. But inside the Bennett mansion the air still felt heavy and tense. Marcus Bennett stood near the large window in his office, his arms folded as he watched the long driveway below. The quiet hum of the house seemed louder than usual, as if the walls themselves were waiting for what would happen next. Somewhere down the hallway, Maria moved softly through the kitchen, trying not to disturb the uneasy silence. Grace sat in a chair near the desk, her hands resting gently over her stomach. She had not spoken for several minutes. Her eyes remained fixed on the printed photograph of the hallway camera, where Harrison Cole's face could be seen clearly beside her unsteady figure from 3 months earlier. The sight of it made her heart beat faster every time she looked. Marcus checked the clock on the wall. 10 minutes. That was how long it had been since Harrison promised he would arrive. Marcus felt a mixture of anger and disbelief rising slowly inside him. For years he had trusted Harrison not only with business matters, but with private conversations, family gatherings, and important financial decisions. Now that same man was driving toward the mansion, unaware that his secret had already begun to unravel. The distant sound of a car engine finally broke the silence outside. Marcus walked to the window and looked down the long driveway. A sleek black sedan rolled slowly toward the front gates before stopping briefly for the guard. Moments later the gates opened, and the car continued toward the house. Grace felt her breathing grow shallow. "That's him," Marcus said quietly. Grace's fingers tightened around the fabric of her dress. The car stopped near the entrance, and a tall man stepped out. Harrison Cole adjusted his expensive jacket and looked up at the mansion with his usual calm confidence. Nothing in his posture suggested fear or guilt. To Harrison, this was just another morning meeting. Inside the house, Marcus's voice became firm. "Grace, I want you to stay here when he comes in." Grace looked up nervously. "You don't want me there?" Marcus shook his head slowly. "Not at first." Grace nodded, though the tension in her face did not fade. A moment later, a soft knock sounded on the office door. Marcus took a slow breath. "Come in." The door opened, and Harrison Cole stepped inside with an easy smile. "Marcus," he said warmly, "you sounded unusually serious on the phone." Harrison's sharp eyes briefly moved across the room, taking in the quiet atmosphere and the documents on the desk. Then his gaze landed on Grace. His smile faded instantly. The silence stretched for several seconds. Harrison spoke first. "Who is this?" Marcus did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked slowly toward the desk and picked up the printed photograph from the hallway camera. He held it carefully between his fingers before placing it on the table in front of Harrison. "You tell me," Marcus said calmly. Harrison frowned as he looked down at the image. For a moment his expression remained perfectly controlled, but then something small changed in his eyes. A flicker, a crack in the calm mask. Marcus noticed it immediately. Harrison cleared his throat. "This looks like footage from the gala," he said lightly. "Why are you showing it to me?" Marcus leaned forward slightly. "Because the man in that picture is you." Harrison looked at Marcus again. "So," Marcus's voice grew colder, "so you walked a young woman into room 312 that night." Harrison glanced briefly toward Grace again before returning his attention to Marcus. "Marcus," he said slowly, "I think you're misunderstanding something." Grace's heart pounded as she listened. Marcus crossed his arms. "Then explain it." Harrison sighed as if the conversation bored him. It was a charity event. Hundreds of staff members were moving through the house. "Maybe she got lost." Grace suddenly spoke. "You gave me the drink." Both men turned toward her. Grace's voice trembled, but she continued. "You were standing near the bar. You handed me the glass yourself." Harrison's expression hardened slightly. "I don't even know who you are." Grace stared at him. "You watched the staff all night," she said quietly. Marcus stepped closer to the desk. "And the security system shows that you changed the access permissions for temporary staff badges." Harrison's eyes narrowed. "That's an accusation." Marcus tapped the photograph. "This is evidence." Harrison's calm demeanor began to fade. "You're seriously entertaining this nonsense." Grace felt anger rising through her fear. "I woke up the next morning with no memory and a child growing inside me," she said firmly. "That is not nonsense." Harrison laughed softly, but the sound carried no humor. "You expect me to believe that story?" Marcus's voice dropped lower. "The medical report confirms the date of conception." Harrison shrugged. "That proves nothing about me." Marcus picked up the security report and slid it across the desk. "It proves you were in that room." Harrison stared at the paper. This time he did not smile. The silence in the room thickened. Finally Harrison spoke again, but his voice was colder now. "Marcus, you're making a dangerous mistake." Marcus met his gaze without hesitation. "No," he said quietly. "The mistake was yours." Harrison straightened his posture. "You have no proof that anything illegal happened." Grace suddenly felt something inside her snap. "You drugged me," she said. Harrison's eyes flashed. "Careful." Marcus stepped forward. "The chemical smell she remembers matches the sedative used in hospital anesthesia." Harrison scoffed. "You're reaching." Marcus slammed his hand against the desk. "Then tell me why you took her into that room." The sharp sound echoed through the office. Harrison looked from Marcus to Grace. Again, for the first time since entering the mansion, his calm mask cracked completely. He exhaled slowly. "You really want the truth?" he said quietly. Marcus's voice was firm. "Yes." Harrison's lips curled into a faint, bitter smile. "Fine." He walked slowly toward the window and stared out at the garden. "You built your empire on control, Marcus," he said softly, "but control makes men blind." Marcus said nothing. Harrison continued. That night wasn't about her. Grace felt a chill run through her body. Then what was it about Marcus demanded? Harrison turned slowly. His eyes were darker now. "It was about you." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Marcus stared at him. "What are you talking about?" Harrison smiled faintly. "You were supposed to be the one in that room." The room fell silent. Grace's breath caught in her throat. Marcus felt the ground shift beneath him, because if Harrison was telling the truth, then Grace had never been the target at all. And that meant the crime that happened 3 months ago was only part of a much larger plan. The room felt colder after Harrison's words settled into the silence. Marcus Bennett stood completely still, staring at the man he had trusted for so many years. Grace sat frozen in her chair, her hands instinctively covering her stomach as if protecting the life inside her from the weight of the truth unfolding in front of them. Marcus spoke slowly. "What do you mean? I was supposed to be the one in that room." Harrison gave a quiet laugh, though there was no joy in it. He walked calmly toward the desk and rested his hands on the polished wood, as if this conversation were nothing more than a routine business negotiation. "You were meant to walk upstairs that night." Harrison sighed. "You always do, before the end of those events." A quiet drink in her office before saying goodnight to the guests. Marcus's mind moved quickly through the memory of the gala. Harrison was right. Marcus had planned to go upstairs around that exact time. But something had delayed him. Marcus's eyes narrowed. "My assistant asked me to review a contract downstairs." He sighed slowly. Harrison nodded. "Exactly." Grace watched them both, confused. Marcus suddenly understood. "You arranged that?" Harrison smiled faintly. "Of course I did." Marcus felt anger rising in his chest. "Why?" Harrison's calm expression slowly hardened. "For 15 years, Marcus, I built your empire beside you," he said quietly. "And every year your name grew larger, while mine remained in the shadows." Marcus shook his head. "You were paid more than anyone in this company." Money wasn't the point. Harrison's voice grew sharper. Power was. Grace listened carefully now, realizing this story had begun long before she ever stepped into the mansion. Marcus spoke again. "So your solution was to destroy me?" Harrison shrugged slightly. "Not destroy you." His eyes flicked briefly toward Grace. "Just weaken you?" Marcus felt a cold realization spreading through him. "You planned the scandal!" Harrison nodded. "Exactly." Grace's heart pounded. "You were going to frame Marquesa?" Harrison gave a small smile. A pregnancy scandal tied to the most respected businessman in Indolovu. Investors would panic. The board would lose confidence. Marcus finished the thought quietly. "And you would step in to take control." Harrison did not deny it. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Marcus asked the question that mattered most. "What went wrong?" Harrison's expression darkened. "You didn't show up." Graves suddenly understood the horrifying truth. "I walked into the room instead." Harrison looked at her. "You were convenient?" Grace felt her stomach twist. Marcus's voice became dangerously quiet. "You drugged her." Harrison sighed. "I needed someone who would not remember what happened." Marcus's fists tightened, "And when you realized I wasn't coming upstairs." Harrison looked away briefly. "I adapted." Grace felt her hands shaking. "You left me there." Harrison's tone was colder now. "I wasn't interested in you." Marcus stepped forward. "You committed a crime." Harrison met his gaze without fear. "You have no witness." Grace stood up slowly. "But you admitted it." Harrison smiled slightly. "Your word against mine." Marcus suddenly walked to the desk and pressed a small button beneath the surface. A faint red light appeared on the phone beside him. Harrison noticed it immediately. His smile vanished. Marcus spoke calmly. "The entire conversation has been recorded." The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. Grace felt tears fill her eyes. Harrison's face turned pale. "You planned this?" Marcus nodded slowly. "After I saw the security footage." Harrison stepped backward. "You think this recording will save you?" Marcus's voice remained steady. "It will save her." Grace felt emotion rising in her chest. Marcus continued. "You used my house, my event, and my name to commit a crime." Harrison looked furious now. "You have no idea what powerful people will do to protect themselves." Marcus stared directly at him. "I do." The office door suddenly opened. 2 uniformed police officers stepped inside. Behind them stood Maria, her expression firm. Harrison's eyes widened. Marcus spoke calmly. "I called them an hour ago." The officers approached Harrison carefully. One of them held a pair of handcuffs. "Harrison Cole," the officer said, "you are under arrest for assault, fraud, and conspiracy." Harrison laughed bitterly. "You think this ends here?" Marcus answered quietly. "It ends for you." The handcuffs clicked around Harrison's wrists. Grace felt the tension in the room finally begin to break. As the officers escorted Harrison toward the door, he turned once more toward Marcus. "You built your empire on trust," Harrison said darkly. "Now everyone will question it." Marcus watched him leave. "Maybe," he said. "But the truth matters more." The door closed behind the officers. Silence returned to the office. Grace sat down slowly again, her hands trembling. Marcus walked toward the window and looked out at the bright morning sky. For the first time since the night before, the house felt lighter. Grace spoke softly. "What happens now?" Marcus turned toward her. His voice was calm but warm. "Now we make things right." Grace blinked back tears. "You don't have to help me." Marcus shook his head gently. "Yes, I do." Grace looked confused. Marcus continued, "This child entered the world because someone abused power under my roof." He paused. "And I will not allow that injustice to define the rest of your life." Grace felt emotions swell inside her chest. Marcus spoke again. "You will have medical care, a safe home, and whatever support you need." Grace whispered, "Why?" Marcus's expression soft. "Because justice is not only about punishment," he looked at the life she carried. "It's about protection." Grace lowered her eyes as a quiet tear rolled down her cheek. Outside the window, the sun rose fully above the town of Ind. A new day had begun. The scandal Harrison tried to create would soon become the very thing that exposed his own crimes. And in the months that followed, Grace would bring a healthy baby into the world, a child born from pain, but raised in truth and dignity. Marcus Bennett's empire would survive, but more importantly, he would learn something wealth had never taught him before, that the greatest power a person can hold is the courage to defend someone who has none.